A man was found dead with a wooden stake driven through his heart, 2 strange bite marks clearly visible on his neck. Even more horrifying was the fact that the victim's body was almost completely devoid of blood. All the evidence suggested vampire legends, but the police believed it was a meticulously staged act. However, the deeper they delved into the investigation, the darker and more horrifying secrets they uncovered, revealing a truth even more terrifying than any myth. Patience is a records clerk working in the police department's criminal records office, and also a patient with Asperger's syndrome. She's not good at socializing, but possesses an extraordinary memory and logical thinking ability. She's the police department's secret weapon for solving cases. But the person who discovered her talent is Inspector Bea, who has just transferred. The police department welcomes a new inspector named Frankie. Coincidentally, the two have an unpleasant encounter on their way to work. Frankie, driving her motorcycle, nearly hit Patience. In the office, Frankie recognized Patience immediately. After learning that Patience was just a records clerk, she became even more arrogant. Frankie treated Patience like an intern there to experience life. They were discussing a recent case. The victim was a well-known photographer named Jonathan. A living object, like a wooden stake, had pierced his chest. There were also 2 clear bite marks on his neck. There was no blood at the scene, but the forensic doctor concluded he died from excessive blood loss. All signs pointed to a bizarre conclusion: a vampire murder. Frankie dismissed the vampire element, believing it was merely the killer's deliberate attempt to create an air of mystery. At this point, Patience suddenly remembered Jonathan's hit-and-run car accident 4 months prior. She wanted to report it to Frankie. Frankie was preparing to question Marina, the agent who discovered the victim's body. Therefore, she had absolutely no time to listen to Patience. In the interrogation room, Marina stated that she and Jonathan had worked together for 15 years. She said she only went to see him in the middle of the night because she was worried he was overworking himself for the exhibition. She insisted that he had very good relationships with everyone and couldn't possibly have any enemies. But Frankie, relying on her woman's intuition, saw through Marina's lie. The relationship between the two was absolutely not normal. Meanwhile, the forensic doctor made a shocking discovery during the autopsy. The bite marks on the victim's neck were made after he died. This meant the killer had hung him upside down after he died and used gravity to drain the blood from his entire body. Just then, Patience burst in with her discovery. She had investigated and found out that the person who hit Jonathan 4 months earlier was named Kevin. He was a thug with a history of violent crimes. Because Patience spoke so quickly, Frankie had no patience to listen to her. Frankie told Patience to write an email report next time and then dismissed her. A colleague expressed his indignation on Patience's behalf and explained that she had autism, so he hoped Frankie could be a little more patient. But Frankie argued that if the police could do their job properly, they wouldn't need a record keeper interfering in the case. Nevertheless, the police summoned Kevin. He admitted to lending money at exorbitant interest rates, but vehemently denied knowing Jonathan. Just as the investigation reached a dead end, the forensic team delivered explosive news. Jonathan's blood type was Rh-null. This was the golden blood type. Only a few dozen people in the world possessed it. Those with this blood type were universal donors for all blood types, making them incredibly valuable on the black market. Some private clinics even packaged it as a vampire therapy cure for all ailments. Patience was also called in to hear the report, but Frankie was so displeased by his presence that she dismissed him. The police followed the blood type lead and traced it to a vampire clinic in Techport. At the same time, they discovered Jonathan and Kevin's figures on the clinic's surveillance camera. After learning Jonathan's unusual blood type, Kevin plotted to take him to Russia to sell his blood for money. However, the clinic turned out to be a scam, so the plan failed. Kevin also revealed that Jonathan had recently earned £125,000, but Jonathan still owed him money. After Patience was dismissed from the police force, she didn't give up. She returned to the crime scene alone, hoping to uncover the cause of Jonathan's death. She found a broken chair with blood stains in the trash can. She deduced that Jonathan wasn't stabbed to death, but had fallen from a height and accidentally landed on the chair. However, when she told Frankie this crucial discovery, she was met with reproach. Frankie accused her of destroying evidence and officially removed her from the investigation team. Despite being suspended, she didn't lose heart and continued to dig deeper into the clues. Very quickly, a new name emerged: Olivia. She was a young girl with sickle cell anemia who coincidentally also possessed yellow blood. Just hours after Jonathan's death, she underwent a bone marrow transplant. The blood reserved for the surgery came from a mysterious, anonymous donation. The police immediately contacted her parents. They quickly discovered 5 liters of blood in bags in their refrigerator. It turned out Jonathan had been selling blood to them at a high price. On the night of the surgery, he demanded £100,000. When they went to beg him, they found him dead. Needing blood to save their daughter, they used the pulley system at the scene scene to hang his body and drain the blood, taking it home. Although they stole the blood, they were not the real culprits. The case returned to square one. By this time, the photos from Jonathan's camera had been developed. The photos show Marina and Jonathan engaging in intimate acts. This confirms Frankie's suspicion that they were a couple. They also found a crucial witness, the taxi driver who drove Marina to the scene on the night of the crime. The driver didn't remember Marina's face, but he clearly remembered the pineapple-flavored chewing gum she was chewing. Patients searched Marina's trash can and indeed found the wrapper of the same type of chewing gum. However, just as she was about to leave, she saw Kevin burst into Marina's house, seemingly intending to kill her. In a moment of urgency, she came up with a brilliant idea and immediately video-called Frankie to transmit real-time footage of the scene. The police arrived immediately. They went through a thrilling chase and finally subdued Kevin and rescued Marina. It turned out that Marina had sent Kevin to teach Jonathan a lesson. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Marina finally broke down and confessed the truth. She loved Jonathan deeply and had sacrificed everything for him. She had even prepared to propose to him, but he wanted to leave her and even refused to let her be his agent anymore. In a fit of anger, she argued with him on the tower and pushed him down with her bare hands. When she returned to check, he was dead and hanging. The case was solved. Frankie acknowledged Patience's contribution, but warned them not to hide anything anymore. She clearly stated that she wasn't the one who had helped Patience, so she wouldn't give him any special treatment. Meanwhile, Elliot came to comfort Patience and gave her a potted cactus. He expressed his desire to spend more time with her. Looking at him, a flash of insight struck her. She had finally solved the riddle using the numbers her mother had left behind. 90,831 is a number used in computer programming. Its coincidence with the subject of this case seemed to foreshadow that the secret her mother left behind was far more complex than she had imagined. That day, the church resounded with the mournful sound of the pipe organ. The player was a talented music student named Vanessa. However, her instructor, Professor Greville, was extremely dissatisfied with her performance. It was like listening to a cat vomiting. He then used the excuse of feeling unwell to leave the practice room early. Vanessa, feeling dejected, returned to the organ. But at that moment, she heard a muffled sound coming from downstairs. Vanessa looked down and saw a girl lying in a pool of blood with her earphones still on. Patience, who was about to go on a date with Elliot, received an urgent phone call to the crime scene. The forensic doctor's preliminary assessment was that the victim was Helen, who had tripped and hit the back of her head on the ground, leading to her death. But Patience noticed a blind spot. There was blood on the victim's hand, and there was blood on her own left hand as well. If she had fallen and died before she started bleeding, she wouldn't have had the chance to reach out and touch her own hand. This means she was injured before the fall. The police immediately launched an investigation. Patience seized the opportunity to obtain the recordings from the gym. Using her heightened senses, she caught an unusual conversation mixed in with the music. Through the sound separation process by the technicians, it was confirmed to be right there. It turned out that the professor hadn't left early, as he claimed. He was the prime suspect. Frankie immediately sent people to search the professor's house and prepared to bring him to the police station. At this moment, the forensic report was released, clearly stating that Helen died from a ruptured aneurysm and that it was a case of natural death. The case seemed to be closed, but the next day, something even more horrifying happened. Professor John was found dead in the same gym. His circumstances of death were exactly the same as Helen's, and he also had bleeding from the ear. The forensic doctor's initial assessment was a heart attack, but Patience was completely unconvinced. 2 days with two mysterious deaths were absolutely no coincidence. She discovered a strange symbol drawn in blood on the piano at the scene. She returned to the recording studio once more, firmly believing that music held secrets. She asked the technician to pinpoint the exact location of the interference she heard, down to the second. This time frame corresponded precisely to a symbol on the sheet music, known as a slur. She had a bold hypothesis. The music itself had killed them. Sure enough, she found an infrasound generator inside the pipe organ. When the pianist pressed a modified key and held it in place for an extended period, the device would emit infrasound waves that were inaudible to the human ear, but capable of causing death. This vibration could have inadvertently ruptured Helen's aneurysm and also killed John, who had a mechanical heart valve implanted, instantly. However, an independent report indicated that the antidepressants Helen was taking caused high blood pressure, so people with aneurysms should absolutely never touch them. This suggests she was unaware of her condition. The perpetrator certainly couldn't have known. Therefore, she was simply an unlucky victim of mistaken identity. The perpetrator's target from the beginning was John. The police began investigating everyone who had a connection to him. Very quickly, a name, Theos, emerged. He had once been the professor's most outstanding student and a musical genius. When Patience and Frankie looked through the past concert schedule book, they inadvertently discovered that Vanessa's advisor, Bernie, was Theos. He had been John's student, but he had accidentally fallen from a balcony and died before an important performance. Frankie immediately realized that it was not an accident at all, but a tragedy caused by John. At this point, the police learned that Bernie had arranged to meet Vanessa at the church, so everyone rushed to the scene. Inside the church, Vanessa was shocked to find that the gentle mentor standing before her was none other than the legendary genius Theos. Bernie confessed everything, that before the concert years ago, John had used cruel words to destroy his confidence and break him down in front of the crowd. He did all this to prevent the professor from continuing to hurt talented young people like Vanessa. After saying this, he pulled out a pistol, preparing to do something reckless. But the police arrived and shot him, knocking the weapon out of his hand. The case was solved. After experiencing the terrifying moment of the shooting, Patience received the attention of her colleagues. Her relationship with Frankie also gradually became more harmonious. Because Elliot wanted to surprise her, he took her to a special, quiet disco dance floor. Here, everyone wore headphones and was immersed in their own world of music. They could enjoy the lively atmosphere without being disturbed by noise. For someone sensitive to sound like Patience, this was undoubtedly the most perfect date in the world. Just as her relationship with Frankie was calming down, a new murder occurred. That day, a business signing ceremony was taking place. Jerry was enthusiastically giving a speech to celebrate the company's bright future. But before he could even put down his champagne glass, there was a loud crash of shattering glass. A magpie had pierced the window and fallen inside. Before anyone could react, Jerry was shot in the chest, falling to the ground in agony and dying instantly. Patience rushed to the scene and immediately noticed something suspicious. The forensic team said the bullet was fired from outside the window. But after observing the bullet trajectory, Patience concluded that the angle made it impossible for the bullet to hit the victim. It must have been 2 bullets. Furthermore, there was only 1 bullet hole in the window, meaning the killer was inside the room. Even stranger, witnesses said they only heard 1 gunshot and the magpie was dead. This made Frankie think of a notorious art thief nicknamed the Magpie, but he only stole, he didn't kill. So this case was becoming increasingly complicated and unpredictable. The police had no leads. Patience's own identity was equally perplexing. Elliot thoughtfully found the bus route to her mother's old address and offered to accompany her. She said she didn't want to find her mother, but her heart was already wavering. The police received the ballistic report and confirmed Patience's suspicions. There were indeed 2 bullets. One went through the window, and the other hit the victim from inside the room. One had a silencer, the other didn't, but there wasn't enough gunpowder residue on the clothes of anyone present at the scene. Could there really be an invisible killer? At this moment, a psychologist named Will came under police scrutiny. He was in the building at the time of the crime and was also one of the notorious suspects of the International Criminal Police Organization. Frankie immediately went to Will's book signing and brought him to the police station. In the interrogation room, he was incredibly arrogant. He claimed to have a perfect alibi. He was on a meeting with a publisher. However, police investigations revealed that the so-called publisher didn't work in that building at all. The publisher had no office there, nor did they have any personal assistants. Instead of panicking at having his lie exposed, he began analyzing the case. He accurately reconstructed the killer's diversion tactics. First, the killer used a silenced gun to shatter the glass, using the noise to attract attention. The moment people turned their heads, he used another gun to deliver the fatal blow. The human brain automatically mistakes the sound of shattering glass for a gunshot, perfectly masking the second gunshot. Finally, he even removed his handcuffs, like magic, in front of everyone. Although not the killer, he was undoubtedly a master of psychological manipulation. With Elliot's support, Patience finally mustered the courage to go to her mother's old residence. However, she received heartbreaking news. Her mother had passed away 13 years ago. The woman gave her a memento left behind by her mother, a pendant containing a photograph of the 2 of them together. Patience looked at the photo with 1,000 conflicting emotions, but she still couldn't let go of the abandoned past. A new clue had emerged in the case. Jack found the victim's lover, Amber. Amber revealed that he was actually very passionate about magic. Patience immediately delved into Jerry's background and discovered that he had been imprisoned for theft when he was young. More importantly, the locations and times coincided perfectly with the timing of the magpie's crimes. The truth became clear. Jerry was not the magpie's victim. He himself was the magpie. Following this clue, the police found his instructor, a magician named Jay, who had taught Jerry magic at reform school years ago. At Jay's magic museum, Patience, using her extraordinary logical thinking, easily deciphered his tricks. At this moment, it was discovered that Amber also appeared on the surveillance camera at the crime scene. It turned out she had been instructed via anonymous email to impersonate a publishing assistant and trick Will, creating a perfect scapegoat for the real culprit. The signature at the end of the email was a phrase called "sweetie pie," which is how Jay called Frankie. The police immediately raided the Magic Museum. Jay, sensing trouble, used the mirror maze to try and escape. Amidst the surreal reflections and dazzling lights, Frankie finally caught him. It turned out Jay and Jerry were master and apprentice thieves. Jay planned the crime while Jerry executed it. However, Jerry became greedy and wanted to break away, even embezzling priceless diamonds. So Jay sent people to rob them and retrieve the diamonds, but they got nothing. Finally, he resorted to a cruel act. He disguised himself as a witness to infiltrate the scene and perform a perfect magic trick. The case was solved, but the whereabouts of the diamonds remained a mystery. Patience and Elliot passed an antique shop, Jerry's favorite place to visit. Recalling Dalton's theory of the invisible gorilla, Patience suddenly had an idea. They entered the shop and discovered the diamonds disguised as bird eggs in a cuckoo's nest. That day, a man took his daughter, Lola, to the train museum. Lola was an autistic girl who didn't like to talk and was very sensitive to external sounds. After seating his daughter, the man said goodbye to his wife, Claire, and left the train car alone. Lola sat alone in her seat, repeating the train schedule from George to Bradpool. This was her way of comforting herself, but she had no idea that the destination of this journey was the breakdown of a family. Patience was on a date with Elliot. They were having a great time playing in the ancient castle ruins. The unexpected arrival of their friends added to the lively atmosphere. However, at that moment, Patience received a call from the police reporting a murder at the train museum. The victim was Philip, Lona's father. He had brought his daughter there to play. He was struck violently on the head with his arm, resulting in his immediate death. At the scene, police initially determined the murder weapon to be a blood-stained wrench. Worse still, Claire was missing, and the only possible witness was Lola. But the little girl was terrified and had hidden herself in a train carriage, repeatedly replaying the train's itinerary. Frankie suggested Patience might be able to guess where Lona was. Patience suspected Lola might be hiding in some cramped space where she felt safe. Sure enough, Patience found Lola curled up under a train seat. To calm Lola down, the police contacted her older sister, Eve. However, Eve's appearance complicated the case. Under police questioning, Eve became extremely agitated. She said that if her mother had run away, it was probably because she couldn't bear the pressure from Lola any longer. During the investigation of surveillance cameras, the police discovered a crucial detail. Lola had entered the museum wearing an orange backpack, but when she was found, the backpack was gone. Patience immediately realized the backpack was the key to the problem. Everyone returned to the museum to search, and Frankie finally found the backpack on top of a locker. The contents of the backpack shocked everyone: 300 pounds in cash and some marijuana. This discovery drastically changed the nature of the case. The girl had been exploited as a drug courier. The deal failed. Her father was murdered and her mother fled. They immediately summoned Eve. Faced with irrefutable evidence, she finally admitted to using her younger sister to transport drugs. She said that she initially did it secretly on her own, but her father found out. However, because the family was heavily in debt, her father not only didn't stop her, but also used his convenient job at the museum to help her arrange the drug transactions, believing it would be safer. Eve, however, insisted that her parents knew nothing about it. The target of this transaction was just a classmate. The trail seemed to be broken again. Patience felt the situation wasn't as simple as it seemed. She recalled the train schedule Lona kept repeating, which included a stop called New Temple Gate. But when she checked the map, she couldn't find this station at all. A thought flashed through her mind. Could this be a train station or a landmark? Sure enough, she found a special school with this name. In the photo album on the school's website, Patience not only found a picture of Lona, but also a familiar face. It was their neighbor, Nadia. Frankie immediately led her team to the school to investigate. The principal told them that Lona had studied there, and Nadia's daughter, Kelly, had also been a student there. They were classmates. Unfortunately, Kelly had passed away from illness last year. Since then, Nadia had been depressed. She blamed the school and constantly harassed school staff and even stalked Kelly's teacher. Patience suddenly remembered seeing Nadia at the museum on the day of the crime. A few days earlier, she had also seen this woman in front of Lona's house. A terrifying suspicion formed in everyone's minds. Nadia, having lost her own daughter, transferred her affections to Lona and treated her like Kelly. Frankie immediately rushed to Lona's house with his men, but the social worker and the two girls had disappeared. She had been approaching this family as a neighbor, but in reality, she was a con artist all along. The police discovered that Nadia had inherited a country villa 3 years prior, so they immediately drove there. Inside the villa, Eve and Claire were being held captive by Nadia. It turned out that on the day of the crime, Nadia had tried to kidnap Lola at the museum. Philip intervened, and in the ensuing chaos, Nadia accidentally killed him and abducted Claire, who had witnessed everything. Now she had drugged Eve and abducted Lola with the intention of escaping. Just as Nadia and Lola were about to leave, Claire and Eve stopped them. In this dangerous situation, Frankie and Patience arrived arrived just in time. The moment Nadia raised her knife to stab Claire, Frankie counterattacked, pushing Nadia down the stairs. The case was finally brought to light. The broken family was reunited. Eve apologized to her mother and sister for what she had done. The three embraced tightly. Patience's life also entered a new chapter. She accepted Elliot's request and went to meet his friends. In the bar, Elliot's friend, also Patience's good friend Billy, and the two who understood Patience best were communicating awkwardly, but their sincerity and concern for her brought a smile she hadn't shown in a long time. Elliot looked at Patience, understanding her and enjoying this beautiful moment. Suddenly, a new murder occurred. That day, at the scene of an academic conference, archaeology star Samuel was preparing to give an important speech. His mentor Lauren sat below the stage, looking incredibly proud of him. He also expressed that without his mentor, he wouldn't be who he is today. Seeing his speaking time approaching, he took a deep breath. He knew a storm was brewing. His speech began, and he enthusiastically recounted Viking history. He mentioned how the Vikings carved their history onto stone tablets. However, halfway through, he suddenly started having trouble breathing, and his expression became one of intense pain. The audience below stared in stunned silence. Lauren and Samuel's ex-girlfriend, Natalie, also looked worried. Finally, he collapsed to the ground in agony and died completely. Patience and her colleagues arrived at the scene. The medical examiner suspected it was either an epileptic seizure or a drug overdose. Even more absurdly, a video of Samuel collapsing went viral online with the headline, "Archaeology star dies suddenly while giving a presentation." Patience found a piece of paper at the scene. Based on her extraordinary memory, she recognized this as shorthand. The paper stated that the runes were fake. This clearly related to the runes Samuel had mentioned in his speech. Could he be trying to expose some dark secret? During the presentation, the police contacted Samuel's mentor, Lauren, who was in charge of the archaeological excavation in Norway. Lauren praised Samuel as a genius, but noted that he sometimes didn't follow the rules. When asked about the fake runes, Lauren showed signs of displeasure. According to the Van Hala Times, he was one of the country's most distinguished Viking scholars. He could tell at a glance if the runes were fake. Furthermore, the autopsy report was available. Samuel's body contained antidepressants and ecstasy. The combination of both caused serotonin syndrome, leading to his death. The police suspected someone might have tried to drug him to ruin his reputation. Unexpectedly, the dose was too large, resulting in a fatality. The police contacted Nathalie. She admitted that they had repeatedly broken up and gotten back together, with him eventually initiating the breakup. She said that in recent months, he had been acting very strangely and had become extremely suspicious. He frequently asked her to drive him to deserted areas or industrial zones, insisting that it must be somewhere out there, as if possessed. She also admitted that before the presentation, she had ordered a lemon soda for him. Lauren had taken it from her hand to give to him. As Nathalie left the police station, Patience saw her secretly running off to meet Lauren. The two had a heated argument outside. At the same time, the police discovered that before Samuel's presentation, two journalists had received anonymous tips alleging illegal activities by archaeologists. One of these journalists had contacted Lauren. In other words, Lauren knew early on that Samuel wanted to cause trouble. Patience discovered a photograph in Lauren's book. The image of a man in a coat caught her attention. The pattern on the man's sleeve was identical to that of a suspect who had secretly left the scene. After the crime, the police invited a rune expert to examine the stone. The results were astonishing. The stone did not originate from the Viking era. Lauren was strongly suspected of the crime. However, just as the police were preparing to question him, they received news of his death. He died in his office. The forensic examination concluded it was a severe allergic reaction leading to anaphylactic shock. Patience recalled Lauren's habit of licking his fingers before reading. Therefore, the source of the allergy was most likely his notebook. Next to his body, the police found a piece of paper with a mysterious string of numbers written on it. While handling the case, Patience's love life was also in turmoil. She had suggested breaking up because Elliot didn't understand her stubbornness about her plans. The police traced the identity of the man in the coat. His name was Brian, and he was a sculptor. Patience had an idea and connected the string of numbers on the paper with the inscription on the runes, which referred to the best craftsman in the Western Ocean. She deduced that the numbers were part of a coordinate system. Combining this with the industrial area Natalie had mentioned, they finally targeted an abandoned warehouse. Inside the warehouse, they discovered a camper van. It was the same vehicle in the photo on the desk of Secretary Lauren, Cassie. The police also discovered that Cassie was Brian's wife. Patience and her colleagues found Brian forging antiques with Cassie in the warehouse. It turned out Brian was talented but unlucky, so he teamed up with Cassie to counterfeit runes. They then sold them to Lauren for a huge profit. The truth finally came to light. Under police questioning, Cassie broke down. Lauren didn't intend to kill Samuel. After the incident, he threatened to blame everything on her and her husband. With no way out, she exploited avoided his peanut allergy. She sprinkled a peanut on his notebook. Brian was stunned when he heard the truth. He never imagined that the woman he loved so deeply could be so wicked. The case was solved, and her colleagues cheered and congratulated Patience. Her crime-solving video went viral on social media. Although heartbroken in love, she realized that she didn't need to change herself or anyone. Being the most authentic person was the most important thing. Before she could adjust her mood, a new murder occurred. In a large tropical greenhouse in the suburbs, a female body was discovered. The victim was Alina, the head botanist professor. Her death was extremely unusual. She died with severe burns to her face, yet there were no signs of a fire at the scene. After examination, Patience confirmed that the body showed no signs of being burned. This was definitely not caused by fire. At that moment, a witness suddenly shouted, "Be careful, stay away from that tree." It turned out that this tree was called the death apple tree. Its sap is extremely corrosive. When mixed with water, it turns into a strong acid. This was the culprit behind Alina's burns. Even stranger, the forensic doctor said Alina had died before she came into contact with the leaves. Patience observed that the victim's face was swollen, her fingertips were purple, and there was vomit nearby. She concluded that the true cause of death was poisoning. A botanist died from poisoning. Some speculated she may have been coerced. Police found an asthma inhaler, a work ID card, and a cell phone on the victim. A text message on the phone caught the police's attention. It read, "I drowned Paco. Come to LaForce Greenhouse." The sender was Teo, the victim's younger brother, who also had a criminal record. Frankie, relying on intuition, immediately wanted to lead the team to LaForce to arrest him, but Patience insisted on following the proper procedure. First, identify the poison, then check the records. This led to a heated argument between the two. Finally, Frankie and his colleagues went to the LaForce farm and found Teo in a greenhouse. When asked where Paco was, Teo pointed to a potted plant nearby. It turned out Paco was a mimosa plant. Because Teo had watered it incorrectly, he had almost drowned it. After learning of his sister's death, he was overwhelmed with grief and looked nothing like a murderer. At this point, the forensic doctor discovered half-digested acacia leaves in Alina's stomach. The tannins in these leaves were poisonous, but not enough to be fatal. Patience, relying on her extensive knowledge, remembered that acacia trees increase their tannin levels for self-defense when they sense an attack. Theoretically, artificial stimulation could indeed make the toxicity lethal. They then found an acacia tree in the greenhouse. Sure enough, it had deep scratches on it, and a pair of pruning shears were lying nearby. Could someone have deliberately stimulated the tree and forced Alina to ingest the poison? Just as the case reached a dead end, Patience and her colleagues uncovered another secret. Teo's farm contained a huge cannabis cultivation shed. After his arrest, he confessed that the farm was actually Alina's idea. They sell marijuana to patients with chronic illnesses. All the income is invested in Alina's secret research. The police also discover a mysterious plant on the farm. She even keeps the details of her research strictly confidential from Teo, saying the less he knows, the safer he is. The investigation takes a new direction when the police discover that Alina used to work at a pharmaceutical company called Braxton, but she suddenly quit 18 months prior. The company had accused her of patent theft, and she countersued the company for harassment. Very quickly, the identity of the mysterious plant is determined to be Artemisia annua, a key ingredient in an antimalarial drug, and Braxton happens to be manufacturing this drug. They are now facing a class action lawsuit due to its serious side effects. The truth gradually becomes clear. Alina must have discovered the flaws in this drug and used her knowledge to try to develop a substitute without side effects. This was intended to cut off Braxton's source of income. Therefore, the company had a motive for murder. To find more evidence, the police contacted Alina's former colleague, Delphine, but they discovered that she had also fallen into a coma due to an overdose 18 months earlier and had not yet regained consciousness. Although Patience's work wasn't going well, her life needed adjustment. A colleague dragged her to experience a trendy dating trend. Others date based on feelings, but Patience dates entirely based on data analysis and logical reasoning. When the guy said he liked scuba diving, she immediately listed a series of potential risks, scaring him. Patience learned that the drug Delphine overdosed on was aconitine. A startling thought flashed through her mind. Acacia trees were the antidote to aconitine. She knew what had killed the professor. Alina hadn't been poisoned by acacia. She knew she'd been poisoned by aconitine and had eaten acacia leaves to counteract it. Unfortunately, it was too late. At that moment, Patience remembered seeing a book in Alina's lab titled True Love in the Future. They quickly returned to the scene and discovered a deeply affectionate dedication in the book, signed by Delphine. It turned out Alina and Delphine were a couple. The aconitine poison acted extremely quickly, so the killer must have administered it inside the greenhouse. The killer must also be someone Alina trusted. This didn't fit the Braxton Company's model of commercial assassination. The killer was someone else. The police arrived at the hospital, hospital, and the nurse mentioned that Alina frequently visited Delphine and even brought a type of gray-blue rose. Patients knew that blue roses don't exist in nature. This must be a new variety created by Alina through genetic modification. At this point, a key figure emerged: Delphine's husband, Tobias. Surveillance cameras showed him visiting the greenhouse before the crime and secretly searching for something in a flower pot. That flower pot contained blue roses named after Delphine. However, Tobias had a perfect alibi. At the time of the crime, he was having dinner at a restaurant in the city center. Patience once again demonstrated her sharp, logical thinking. She pointed out that the poison didn't necessarily have to have been ingested immediately before death. It could have been a pre-planned attack. The police re-examined Alina's asthma inhaler and indeed found a conatine powder inside. The purchase record for this inhaler was on Tobias's credit card. It turned out he had swapped her inhaler while they were having dinner together. When he learned his wife was leaving him for another woman, jealousy drove him mad. First, he used aconitine to put his wife into a coma, then disguised the case as a suicide. When he saw the blue rose bush named after Delphine, he was completely overwhelmed by their deep love. The case was solved, and Teo was acquitted. Frankie apologized and invited everyone to her home. The team's relationship improved as a result. Looking at a photo of Frankie and her mother on the wall, Patience remembered her own deceased mother. At the dinner table, everyone raised their glasses and chatted happily. Regardless of how many difficult cases lay ahead the next day, this moment of joy was the most important. Patience was still rejoicing at the team's reconciliation when a new murder case unexpectedly arose. In a solemn monastery, a devout monk was found dead in the church. His death was about to reveal a dark secret that had been hidden for 15 years. Early in the morning, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting sacred rays. But this tranquility was quickly shattered when Father Lucas was found slumped on the cold ground with a candle stuck in his chest. Frankie rushed to the scene, still preoccupied with her colleague's dating app. The man in the photo was holding a dog and wearing a turtleneck sweater. She thought he had plenty to criticize. Meanwhile, her colleagues were discussing a philosophical question: how to determine one's destined soulmate. A preliminary forensic examination revealed the murder weapon to be a bamboo stick about 15 centimeters long. It was likely taken from the crime scene, but strangely, the weapon had been cleaned and left no fingerprints. Patience reasoned that this was most likely Lucas's doing. Why would he want to protect the murderer who killed him? The police immediately questioned all the monks in the monastery. The abbot, Jacqueline, received them. According to him, Lucas had just transferred from another monastery 2 months prior. The person who discovered his body was a new monk named Thomas. But Patience made a shocking discovery. In the police department's records, there was no birth certificate or social security record for the man named Lucas. He seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. The only clue was that he had joined a monastery on St. Louis Island in 2010. Coincidentally, Abbot Jacqueline was also there around the same time. This was absolutely no coincidence. So Jacqueline was definitely hiding something. Before they could investigate further, they were summoned to a meeting about improving relations between the police and the public. The enthusiastic organizer suggested that police officers participate in the local Viking festival and interact more closely with the public. After the meeting, Frankie and Patience went to find Jacqueline again. They asked why he hadn't mentioned that Lucas had been expelled from his former monastery. It turned out that while at the monastery, Lucas had claimed to be able to see visions of God. Jacqueline, who had always believed in Lucas, had invited him to his monastery for refuge, but just 3 weeks prior, someone had painted an inverted 5-pointed star on Lucas's door. This was a symbol of Satan. The police questioned the monks of the monastery again. This time, their testimonies showed serious discrepancies. The young monk said that Lucas had sincerely fasted, but the middle-aged monk said that Lucas was incredibly greedy, even stealing food. An older monk bluntly stated that hypocrites were worse than infidels. Lucas had brought Satan into the monastery. At the same time, the forensic doctor discovered numerous old whip marks on Lucas's back, looking more like he had suffered torture. Countless signs pointed to this being an inside crime. Very quickly, the cybercrime unit sent in a new clue. An extremist organization called God's Revenge was constantly attacking Lucas online. Through IP address tracking, the police discovered that one of its members was inside the monastery. This monk, named Zechariah, admitted to drawing the 5-pointed star because he discovered Lucas had secretly met with a woman outside. Therefore, he believed Lucas had betrayed the faith. This mysterious woman, named Katie, was the key to solving the mystery. The police, using the address provided, found Katie's roommate and learned that she had been missing for several days. The roommate also mentioned that Katie's ex-boyfriend, Lucas, had visited her a few weeks prior. This name immediately put Patience on alert. She investigated and discovered that Lucas had changed his name in 2010, just before officially joining the monastery. He also had a criminal record for violence. Patience suddenly remembered the monk saying Lucas stole food. Everyone returned to the monastery. Using an old architectural drawing, they discovered a mobile bookshelf in the location of an abandoned barn. Pushing the bookshelf aside revealed a secret room, and Katie was inside. It turned out that Lucas had hidden Katie there to help her overcome her addiction. He had always loved her deeply, even considering her his confidant. This made Patience question her relationship with Elliot. At this point, Patience made another significant discovery. According to the records, 15 years ago, at the hospital where Katie worked, a doctor named Robert was fatally attacked. Katie was a witness, but she claimed she saw nothing. The police found a half-heart pendant in the victim's clenched hand. It was a matching necklace that Katie was wearing. Faced with irrefutable evidence, she finally broke down and told the truth. Years ago, Lucas, wanting to protect her, accidentally killed Robert. Since then, he had changed and gone into hiding. The police immediately targeted Robert's younger brother, Leo, a delivery man who regularly delivered supplies to the monastery. Leo had poured gasoline throughout the church because he wanted all the prisoners who were covering for the killer to die. At the critical moment, the police stormed the church from the tunnel and successfully apprehended Leo, preventing a tragedy from occurring. The case was solved, and life went on as usual. The entire team was sent to a Viking festival to build community relationships. Patience, who wasn't good at socializing, was pushed onto the stage to give a speech. For a moment, she was overwhelmed by her social anxiety. Just as she was flustered, Sheriff Baxter stepped onto the stage and offered her his unwavering support. Under everyone's watchful eyes, she mustered the courage to share her story as someone with autism. She recounted how she had found a sense of belonging within the team. Her sincerity earned her applause from everyone. The team's camaraderie reached its peak. At this moment, while the team was still immersed in the joyful atmosphere of the Viking festival, the next day, police sirens shattered the tranquility of York. A large number of heavily armed Special Forces officers surrounded the police station, creating an extremely tense atmosphere. Commander Banks rushed to the scene and learned that the police station had been taken over by an escaped convict who was holding at least 2 hostages. What troubled him even more was that Frankie was also on the list. The officers had lost contact. Banks was the same officer who had personally sent this female prisoner years ago. He immediately grabbed the loudspeaker and tried to establish contact with the escapee. But the voice that came through the receiver was Frankie's calm voice. It turned out that 90 minutes earlier, Patience had met a tense-looking woman at the cafe named Nicola. Nicola claimed she had been wrongly imprisoned for murder 15 years ago and had just been released. That year, her support group's guarantor was found stabbed to death at his home. When she arrived, the victim was covered in blood. Because she was drunk at the time, she panicked and ran away. As a result, the next day, the police found her at home. No one believed the words of an alcoholic. The police concluded that her motive was fear that her bailiff would report her drinking to Social Security, causing her to lose custody of her daughter, so she committed murder to silence him. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Patience flipped through the files and was astonished to discover that the police chief in charge of the case that year was none other than the current Commander Banks. She immediately realized something was amiss. The entire report contained no records of other suspects. Just as they were discussing the case further, the alarm suddenly sounded. A warning about Nicola's escape appeared on the screen. Before they could react, Nicola pulled out a gun and kidnapped Frankie and Patience, taking them to the files room. Frankie was confronting Banks on the phone. Banks adamantly refused to reopen the investigation. Frankie, however, confronted him vehemently, warning him not to act rashly. She asked for an hour and promised to resolve the matter peacefully. After that time, they would launch an attack. Banks agreed, but behind his back, he ordered the Special Forces to prepare for an immediate assault, completely distrusting Frankie. Inside the archives room, Nicola's only request was to connect to the server in Manchester to reinvestigate the old case. But the police station's external network had been cut, preventing Patience from accessing the data. In this critical moment, she came up with a brilliant idea. She immediately called her colleague Jaden outside, instructing him to find a way to break into the headquarters building and connect to the server from within. Jaden and Akbari, acting on orders in this critical situation, risked their lives to successfully break in and transmit the documents to Patience. She quickly analyzed the documents and discovered a strange coded message in the victim David's notebook. Just as she was pouring all her energy into deciphering the code, Banks ordered the attack. Colleagues tried to dissuade her, arguing that acting prematurely would put Frankie and Patience in danger. But Banks went ahead with it. Almost simultaneously, Patience also deciphered the code. It turned out that the victim, David, was a chemistry professor. He had used the atomic numbers from the periodic table to record the names of all the members of the rehabilitation group. Just as the truth was about to come to light, the Special Forces stormed in. The records courtroom immediately lost power. In the ensuing chaos, Frankie and Patience were subdued by the special forces. Nicola, however, took the opportunity to escape. Banks, seeing the mess before him, was furious and blamed everything on Frankie. Frankie and Patience were immediately suspended from their duties pending an internal investigation. Frankie's boss, Sheriff Baxter, advised her to cooperate with the investigation, but she remained convinced that Banks was the mastermind behind it all. On the other hand, Patience, during questioning, clearly and coherently explained her new findings. Silicon dioxide and sodium carbonate, characteristic of a glass factory, were found at the crime scene. The police relied on this to determine that Nicola had been to the factory, but Patience presented another possibility, that the perpetrator had brought these contaminants from the factory to the crime scene. This meant the real culprit was another member of the rehabilitation group. Banks' team from years ago had never investigated this clue at all. In the cell, Frankie and Patience finally had a chance to meet. They couldn't understand why Nicola had to flee. Patience speculated that Nicola might have obtained what she wanted, the list of attendees at the meeting. Frankie suddenly remembered Nicola mentioning that her 6-year-old son had died in a car accident. The perpetrator had fled 18 years ago and remained at large until now. They finally realized that Nicola's desire wasn't to clear his name, but revenge. Patience immediately called Elliot to ask his colleague in Manchester to retrieve the accident report from years ago. At the same time, Banks was preparing to hold a press conference to portray himself as a hero and have Frankie and Patience take the blame. Frankie's team decided to act first. They took all the evidence and intercepted Banks before the press conference. Through the testimony of a witness in the accident report, Patience identified the driver who caused the accident. Frankie also used her connections at the hospital to find the driver's admission records from the day after the accident. The patient's name was Andrew. Andrew was a new member. He joined the team for the first time on the very day David was murdered. The truth was revealed. Andrew confessed to the crime. He drove the car that caused the accident and then fled. David had advised him to turn himself in. Unwilling to take responsibility, he killed David and blamed Nicola. Banks's investigation had a serious flaw that jeopardized his career, forcing him to cancel the press conference and order a full-scale manhunt for Andrew. Frankie and Patience were released on the spot. They rode their motorcycle to Andrew's residence, but they were too late. Nicola had pointed a gun at Andrew and cornered him on the rooftop. Frankie tried to reason with Nicola, telling her that the evidence had been found and Andrew would face justice. But the hatred accumulated over 18 years had driven Nicola mad. In that crucial moment, Patience stepped forward. Patience's sincerity moved Nicola. The moment she lowered her gun, the sniper opened fire. Frankie, wanting to protect Patience, was unfortunately hit and fell. Finally, Andrew was arrested, and Nicola's wrongful conviction was clear. Banks, embroiled in a scandal, had to resign. After Frankie recovered and returned, his relationship with Patience grew even closer. The investigators finally concluded they were innocent and praised their performance. After the case closed, Patience and Elliot unexpectedly met at a colleague's wedding. A connection seemed to resurface between them. However, the appearance of a mysterious woman shattered this peace. She approached Patience and uttered a sentence that deeply shocked her. This concludes Season 2 of Detective Patience. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.